here is having problems. So that's a very important announcement, okay?
Okay. Can you get everybody back? 1, 2, 3, da, da. Oh. Okay, we're ready to start the speaker portion of today's program, so if everybody could take their seats. Okay, if you're in the middle of signing up or something, we can finish it later. Our speaker today is Pam LaFond. She is a member of WVGS. You've been a member since when? About 10 years. She has previously been our second vice president, and she is currently the director of membership outreach. She and her husband Dave are retired from the United States Air Force. Pam went into teaching a few years before retiring for good, and I believe you taught 4th grade? 6th grade literature. I have you mixed up with somebody else. Well, then you should be able to control this unruly group here. Yes. She has been working on her family ancestry for over 40 years, and she still has a few brick walls to hurdle before she is completely done. And she's going to be speaking to us today on cemeteries, graveyards, and headstones. Thank you, Pam.
Well, thank you, everybody, and Happy New Year. To try and relax myself a little bit, I'm going to look at tables and see friends that I have at all these different tables, so I'm just talking to friends right now. And I've often said that when you come to a function like this, if you don't learn something from the speaker who's worked 3 or 4 hours or 10 or 12 on their presentation, you're going to learn something from the people at the table you're sitting at. And just sitting here today, Donna shared some things with me that I'm going to share with you later because it was all news to me about graveyards and headstones. So when you come to functions, it's not necessarily always the presentation, but the people around you who are sharing. And that's what genealogists do, is we share amongst each other. So I thank you for that. Okay, on our cemeteries, graveyards, and headstones, if you downloaded the papers that were attached to the information, you can read right along with me because that's my whole presentation right there. Is it the up button? Which one of these?
It'll be this one here.
Alrighty, thank you. Yeah. Okay, cemeteries. We know they're physical evidence of our past, of our families. Museums that preserve artifacts. You'll find a lot of things in a cemetery that don't necessarily belong there. And headstones of people long gone. There are 8 types of cemeteries, and you may have come across some of these, but I have not come across all of them. The church burial yard is sometimes in the floor, especially if you see this in the 1700s. If you've been to Europe or other foreign countries, they buried people right there in the floor. I was able to see where Shakespeare was buried in his church in the floor. They also have family burial plots that can be hard to find and must have permission to visit. Sometimes these are on private property, and you can't just go, drive up, jump the fence, and go in. People look down on that, so you need to knock on the front door and ask permission. Country cemeteries, many homemade markers at the country cemeteries, and some headstones are purchased from the Sears and Roebuck Company back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Can you imagine? Who remembers the catalog from Sears and Roebuck? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, they used to have a section in there, evidently, for headstones, and they would mail them to you. Next, on D, we have the elite garden cemeteries, and these tended to be places of contemplation, more like a park atmosphere. Have you been to these? These are mostly in the east, aren't they? Not so much in the western states like we have now. And they're peaceful enough to have family picnics, although I know right out here at in Avondale, where I have some family members buried, people have family picnics at that cemetery at Holy Cross, although it's not that type of cemetery. And Mount Auburn, Massachusetts, was the first place to have the garden cemetery. So that's where it started in the United States. And then you have the ordinary urban cemeteries, and they're not a park-like setting. They're row after row of headstones, and if you drive down the I-10 off to your right before you get to the underpass for 7th Street and 7th Avenue, you'll see a big one on the right. One of my friends, Gloria, was buried there, one of the teachers that I worked with. It's a very nice cemetery, but it's definitely not the type that you go and have a picnic at. And then next we have the Veteran Cemetery, and there's approximately 110 across the United States that are just for veterans. Now again, here in Holy Cross, where I'm associated with, they have a veteran section. So when you're doing your research, if you know you have a veteran that you're trying to find, see if the cemetery has a section just for the veterans. And usually it's just a little special area that has an American flag pole there, and they do the, for Veterans Days and so on, they would do the taps, and they would do special military funerals specifically in that area. So not just at the veteran cemeteries, but also at sections in a regular cemetery. Most famous one, of course, is Arlington. Has everybody been to Arlington? Absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous, lot to see there. And must have an honorable discharge in order to be buried in a military cemetery. And the way you validate that is a 214. And if you have any parent, grandparent, or great-grandparent who was associated with the military, you should be writing off to the government and getting a copy of that 214 just to have in your records. Because the 214 will tell you things like mine says what schools I had been to, what great awards I had won, not. The day that I enlisted, the day I retired, what rank I retired at. There's a lot of more information on that than just information to get someone buried in a cemetery. It's good information to have. So if you have any military people in your family, you should request a 214. Memorial Park cemeteries are kind of like the fast food ones. You've seen them. They have flat headstones, very plain. Everything is laid flush on the ground, and that's for, you know, cleaning and keeping everything simple. And then there's the Potter's Field. Has anybody ever been to a Potter's Field? Yeah. Right here at the base, at the end of the runway, the prisoners at Perryville Prison used to take the people out there and bury them in Potter's Field on the base. And now, they were doing that when the men were out there. Remember, the men were out there years ago, and now it's all female prison, and I don't know if the females are doing it. And I imagine if they are, they're not taking the actual bodies. I'm sure they're burying the ashes, because unclaimed people are not the way it used to be. So, mass graves for unknown and unwanted people. People with no identification wind up in the Potter's Fields. Okay, the next one is composition and durability of our headstones. In 1650, a lot of them were made just from rough boulders with no inscription. And you've seen this in the old Western movies where they'll move a stone over the head part of where they buried somebody. And if they included a cross or a Jewish star, It was made of wood. It didn't last very long. But a stone, at least, is a marker. From 1660 to 1850, they started making them out of sandstone, limestone, and slate, which lasts a lot longer. And then the Roman times, letters and numbers were used because they lasted longer. They could drill or cut into the stone deeper with those easily. And then in 1770 and 1880, marble headstones that dissolved due to the acid rain and very soft. So if you have someone you're looking for that was buried between 1770 and 1880, you may find a stone of some sort, but are you going to be able to read the writing on it? I doubt it. And then in 1930, we came about with the veterans' headstones made of marble and still using the Roman letters. So these are the types that would have been used after World War II in Korea, Vietnam. And then we have italic lettering and numbers will not hold up to the weather, which is our regular script. And then in 1880 to 1990s, they sandblasted granite, which lasted longer. And you can clean the lichen and mold off of this. Does anybody know what lichen is? Yeah, it's that green ucky stuff, isn't it? Yes. Oh. Oh, sorry. Where'd I go? Help. Oh. There you go. Just ask, see, and it happens. See? Lucky me. Can clean off the lichen and mold. And something to remember, and we'll get into cleaning a little bit later, but that lichen and stuff, I definitely wear gloves. 1990 came up with the cast metal headstones, and granite headstones from 1700 graves indicate a newer placement. And what does this mean? That means that if you have someone who died in the 1700s and they have a nice marble shiny headstone, that tells you somebody has replaced an older headstone, and you can do that. Okay, common symbols on these headstones. An hourglass represented flight or passage of time. And the soul effigy, which I thought was kind of funny looking myself, but I looked it up and that's what the picture is, shows immortality of the soul passage to the afterlife. So people were putting these on the headstones because we know back in the 17 and 16 and even in the 1800s, not everybody read script. Not everybody understood Tom Jones, born this date, died this date, married to lovely Martha. No, so they would put pictures up on their headstones to show that they cared and that this person's life meant something to them. Okay. The urn, and we see a lot of urns. Death of the flesh is what that represents. And then the weeping willow, which I've seen, I love weeping willows actually, is the mourning and earthly sorrow of the passing of this person. And next we have the heart for a blissful soul in colonial era, and romantic love in the Victorian era. So when you're looking at a headstone and you see a heart, look at the years. What are they trying to tell you in this symbol? And then the roses we see a lot of. Open rose is love and motherhood and beauty. The rosebud signifies youth, a youthful death. And next we have the archways, pillars and gates. Completed pillar or gate or column is meant that they had a full life. Half-carved pillar, column, or stone, life was cut short and it was a sudden death. So now when you see these things and it looks like, well, they didn't finish that particular sculpture because they're symbolizing that life was cut short. And then the next one, the forefinger pointing up, and we really have to be careful with these fingers, people. This came out of Victorian art, and it represents the person wanting to go up to God, the soul has gone to heaven. And then the forefinger pointing down, God is reaching down for the soul. And how do you know it's God's hand and not Brother John's hand saying, let's go? You know, because there's no cuff. If there's no cuff, that represents that it's a religious, a symbol of God. And two hands shaking, no sleeves, as God is welcoming you to heaven. When there's no sleeves, the two hands. And the next one with the two hands and there are cuffs, that's a husband and wife who still like each other when they die. And they're showing they had a bond. And then the next one is the book, and a book of life, or the Bible. It's a very traditionally a Bible. Palm leaves, we see a lot of these, or lilies, resurrection of Christ, which has a lot to do with the Easter ceremonies, and innocence, purity, and fidelity with the palm leaves. And the angels, of course, are God's messenger and the guardians of the soul that is buried here. Okay. The dove is the Holy Spirit, or as we used to say when I was a kid, the Holy Ghost, but that changed over time. It represents peace, peace to the person who is buried here. And the lambs are children's graves for purity, gentleness, and the innocence of that child that has died. That's what that represents. So a lot of symbols and representation on these headstones. Remember, for people who didn't read and write, this meant a lot to them. Here's the completed pillars that we talked about, and the half-carved pillars and columns that we talked about. And so the first time I saw that half-carved one, I thought, oh, was there an earthquake, or what happened here? Yeah. But there's a message to it now that we understand that. And common symbols and headstones that are universal and came later. The anchor is for hope, or you've got a Navy man here, or a Navy woman here, buried. But at first it was for hope. Whoopsie. And here is a very old headstone, you can see, but you see the hammer and the anvil. He was a blacksmith. Again, the symbolism. And a basket over a grave shows fertility and motherhood. So that could be a mom buried there, or a mom and a child. Back in the day, a lot of women died in childbirth, didn't they? So that could be the symbol. And then the bench is there for the mourners to sit and talk with the deceased person, do some contemplation on their life, on your life. And the bird represents the flight of the soul. Where is it going? I don't know. Over 8,000 symbols used on headstones throughout history. We just touched on a couple here, a couple universal ones. You can get more into it, but there's a book that I used, and it's at the end of my presentation, and we have a copy of it in the library, and she does very well on graveyards and so on. No readers at the time understood those symbols used in cemeteries, and that's why they used symbols, because they weren't reading. Tree stumps represent the woodsmen of the world. Has anybody ever heard of that group before? You have, very good. I had not, so I had to do a little research. AAONMS, Ancient Arabic Order of Nobles in the Majestic Shrine, better known as Masons. Not as big as it was 20, 30 years ago. My father-in-law was a Mason for 50 years. My husband was a Mason for like 20, and none of our children are Masons, so I don't know if it's going to continue on or not. But that's the symbol that they use on their headstones. AASR, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rites, which is another arm of the Masons. And then the BPOE, Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks. You ever been to an Elks Lodge? Gone to a wedding at Elks Lodges? Sure. That's the symbol they put on their headstones. FOE, Fraternal Order of the Eagles. I wasn't quite sure what this was. I have seen them before. Does anybody know what the Order of the Eagle is? It's not Boy Scouts. I know what those eagles are, but it's one that I have seen attached to headstones. KFC, I'm not talking chicken. Knights of Columbus, which is a Catholic group that does a lot of support for their churches and very active in communities, and that's their symbol. And then we have here the issued, like everything else in the military, issued headstone that everybody is entitled to if they served more than 90 days in the military. If you served more than 90 days in the military with that 214, anybody in your lineage group can order you a headstone. A lot of these are hung on the back of the original headstone, my father-in-law's is, and they usually entail the full name of the person who served, their rank, the military branch they served in, their birth date and their death date. And when it comes to the symbol, on this particular one that I chose, it shows this very simple cross. When I filled mine out for where I'm going to be buried, they had over 86 symbols you could choose from to have put on your headstone. It was like, in my day, it was a cross with the crucifix, a cross, a Jewish star, and maybe a moon. But now it's like all kinds. So if you were going to give a headstone to someone and you need to research what religion or symbol would best suit them, ask your person at the cemetery. They have a piece of paper they hand you, and it shows all those on the back of the paper you fill out to get your headstone from the military. Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to get that ahead of time?
No, after you die, they submit it. Yeah. Yeah. You can fill it out ahead of time, and it's in your file. Well, my guy did anyway. Okay, tips for searching a cemetery. I know you're all ready to go out there and find those headstones. The best, spring is the best time to go if there wasn't a rainstorm, because the snow will get you, the ice will get you. Spring is nice, and here in the valley, it's not 106 yet. Be careful and look out for snakes, ticks, chiggers, and poison ivy. Emphasis on the snakes here. Wear protective clothes with long sleeves and long pants. Even if it's warm, you want to be protected. Look for ground shifting and wild animals. Again, Mr. Snake. What type of cemetery is it? What direction is are the graves facing? If the wife is on the left-hand side of the husband, that's traditional. Are there common surnames in the area? If you're going to look for Tom Jones, I'll bet you within a 6-foot radius, you're going to find 1 or 2 more Joneses that may be the brother, the cousin, the person who owned the plots, and you can start figuring out who everybody was. Are there decorations left by other people? Is there somebody else who's honoring this person that you're looking for? It could be a blood relative to you that you don't know about. Is there food for the journey? There are many cultures who leave food behind on a anniversary date of their birth, anniversary date of the death, anniversary of their marriage, if it was a couple, and they leave food, drink, things that the person liked. My father-in-law's headstone had some stuffed animals because they knew he liked certain cartoon characters. And so the grandkids would give him that. So when people leave things, that means somebody else knows this person and somebody else is attending to the gravesite. It'd be nice to connect with them if you could. The broken pottery is a symbol from many cultures that the life has ended. They no longer need the utensil to eat with, but yet they want to be cared for. It's a symbolism in many countries. Note-taking at the cemetery, not on the back of your checkbook. That was a first that I heard that. Write in a book that is dedicated to this part of your research. Page 1, 2, one may be in Nebraska, and page 2 may be in Omaha or may be in New York. Dedicate a spiral notebook to this. Give a detailed location of the cemetery, because the cemeteries don't get lost, but people who remember where they are do get lost. Provide location of the plot. We all know there's a section, row, number, right? Did the office help you with the maps? And remember, the people who are helping you in the office, some of them have just been hired. They don't know as much as you do about that person or that plot. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. If you can find the old guy who tends the headstones, who knows everybody, that's the person I'd be talking to. Draw out your own map for the grave placement. What type of lettering is used on that headstone? And what type of stone is it? Because then you can guess by the age of the person that died, when they died, and what type of stone they used. And given a description of the overall condition of this headstone, because it may need to be replaced. Maybe you and cousin Susan should get together and decide, how can we honor this person? Or maybe there's a headstone that there isn't one even there. The lady in the office gave you the plot, the row, the section, and all you find is a little bit of grass. Well, then the person was never honored with the headstone. Overall shape of the headstone, if it's there, take a picture and draw the stone the way you see it. Draw it. Put it in your little book. And when you're taking a picture, Donna told me, take a picture with you standing next to it or behind it if you don't want to see this, because it shows the next generation you honored that person by visiting their headstone, visiting their gravesite, and maybe they died 150 years ago, but you're still honoring them by visiting.
So it shows the size of the headstone.
And it shows the size, there you go, compared to the person. Very good. Very good. And then list other names around that stone. Sometimes people around that stone have a different name, but it was also a sister who married into a different family. So two sisters are next to each other, but the names are different, the last names. Not everybody records the maiden name, right? So record what's around there, take pictures of what's around there. And then also look for, sometimes stone cutters make errors. That's why we have a delete on our computers, because we make errors, don't we? Well, when he makes an error, sometimes he went, ugh, oh well, they'll never notice. Well, yeah, we do. So take a picture, note the errors. The dates may not match the type of stone used, and past family notes may not be correct. Right? what to take, oh wait, I'm going too fast. Okay, here's a list of things, and it's up to you what you take. You know your household, but the things I would suggest that you take. A large, bright colored bag to hold everything. You're not going to leave it in the cemetery for somebody else to take if it's a light bag. If you take something that looks like grass, you may forget it, so bright. A small carpenter's apron to hold needed supplies as you're bending over and you have to get up off those knees. If you have everything you need in that little apron in front of you, you're not getting up as often. You need bug spray, you need suntan lotion, knee pads to protect your lovely knees. Small whisk broom. Wet wipes or old hand cloths to wipe the headstone off. Spray bottle of water. No chemicals should be used unless it is a professional lichen spray bottle that you can buy on Amazon. It's about $15. My daughter purchased it to clean her headstones that she needed to clean, but it's a professional brand. I suggest you start with water. Be careful. Soft dish brush or nylon scraper. Camera, film, or your phone is the best camera you're ever going to buy right now. Take it with you and take pictures. White chalk. Has anybody in here ever chalked a headstone? In the back, the lady has here. A lot of cemeteries do not want you doing that anymore because they feel the rubbing on the headstone is wearing away the thickness of the writing. So you have to ask permission to do that. But if you do that, you could use interfacing, fabric, or white paper. And here again, must have permission to do so. And some people then take those home, fold them up, and put them in their file with that person's information. This day and age, I think, pictures. Cleaning and chalking the headstones. Not sure if it's allowed anymore to do that chalking bit, like I said. Must ask if you may do the chalking or rubbing. Only clean with water and a soft brush. Crayons or white chalk only if you're going to chalk the front of it. A mirror may help with the lighting when you're taking a picture. I think it was in one of our presentations here or at another church where I was at, and the lady said that a mirror really helped catch the light and beam off that headstone. She got gorgeous pictures of old headstones using a mirror. I haven't tried it, but it sounds cool. If you take the chalk home on this, you have to iron it out to set the crayon, which I have never done, so I really don't know that much about it. Odd leftover information. I love the word odd. My daughter Katie used to say, ODD, Ma. ODD. Pots outside the Catholic cemetery may have been a suicide until 1964, Vatican II. They were not allowed because it was considered murder. Now they have changed their mind because who does the celebration of life? The people who are still living. So they changed their mind on that, thank goodness. Fences around a cemetery were to keep the cattle out. One of my brothers, Tony, every time we were on the bus in Chicago, he'd always say to me, "You see Montrose Cemetery? People are dying to get in there, Pam." It's like, and I look at him like, "You've said that 6 times already." If your feet are facing east, so you can rise with Christ, it's a religious thing, on the second coming. If they're facing west, it may be the pastor of this group who is facing his congregation, who is all buried with their feet to the east. Yes?
Some cemeteries have the headstone at the head of the buried person and others at the feet. Is there a difference?
I had not heard that. Really? Here in America?
Some have both.
Oh, really? No, I've not heard that. I do know, I don't know the head to feet part, but I do know in a lot of cemeteries, because the cities have grown up around them, people are being buried, the first of the couple to go gets buried, and then the second gets buried right on top. So it's a two-person area for burying. And although this is kind of a new thing, several years ago when I was researching my grandmother, and the lady in Chicago said, I cannot find her in our cemetery. And I said, I know my grandmother is buried here. So another lady came, sweet. She said, let me go look again. She went and looked again, and my grandmother was buried in 1936. She said, oh, your grandmother is buried on a child, because when she died, there was no money for a plot. And someone said to them in their Italian neighborhood, our daughter is buried here. If you paid for opening the gravesite, she can be buried on top of her. So people are double buried back in the 30s and 40s because people didn't have money to pay for a new plot. So if you can't find somebody, sometimes really looking through those records, that lady found that for me. So you never know. Okay, Union headstones. Oops, sorry. Union headstone markers have a rounded top, so you could visually see that. You'd know if all the writing is gone, you would know by the rounded top what group he was with. And Confederate headstones have point tops. Some say that the Union soldiers could not sit on those markers when they're walking through. Clever, but I don't know if that's true or not. Also, when I was talking to Donna, she was telling me that she did some research on a military man from the 1860s who died, and she was recently able to get him a headstone. If you do the research and get the government contacting you, you can get them to place headstones on graves that are over, 1865 to now. And also, if you have military that you know of, and you have the 214 that I talked about earlier, and you know that they didn't have 214 back in those days, but recent, a friend of mine did some research and said, oh, my grandfather was in World War I, and he received 6 different medals during that time in Italy. And she wrote off to the government, and they not only sent her a duplicate of all the medals to put in his shadow box that she was making, they had military people come from the base and present them in a ceremony. So all you have to do is a little research and a little time talking with people, get to know them, schmooze them, as my brother Tony used to say. And things are out there for your veterans, if you're working on any veterans, if you want them to have some of their due. So I thank you for that information, Donna. That's all I have. Yep, that was it. I should say my granddaughter, Lucy, helped me get the slide together, so thank you, Lucy. We all need a grandchild that knows how to do the electronics. Thank you very much. Do I have time? Okay.
I have one thing to add about the cemetery. If the cemetery has an office rather than the parish, maybe, I found this. When anybody is buried, they have some family member or relative or whatever has to fill out pre-interment forms for the cemetery. And I was able to find a nephew of a grandfather who filled out that pre-interment paperwork, which I didn't know about. I didn't know his name or anything. This is on my husband's side. So always ask for the pre-interment records, and you might be surprised because they'll say who it was and what they're requesting. Now, we do have a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions for Pam, just repeat the question.
Okay, so what Irma is saying is if both the people were in the military, you get a separate grade for the man and wife at a military installation, not at like Holy Cross or a private. Very good. Oh, very nice. Yeah, the last I had heard, they were doing 15 to 17 veteran burials a day at our cemetery out here. So, yeah, and they have like 6 or 8 sites to do them at, so they're constantly, you got to book it like, you know, you're booking dinner. It's a lot. Yes, sir.
And the VA also provides documentation for you to prepare for burial of a veteran.
Yes, yes.
And that's available anytime to a veteran. All you got to do is write in and ask for it.
Very good. The veterans can write in and ask, I think it's actually a pamphlet, and they send you the paperwork so you can start working on that when the veteran is still alive. What do you want? How do you want this done? You know, some want to be buried, some want to be cremated. So yeah, that's great. That's great. The government is there to help us, and a lot of stuff is online. You just got to keep digging, and you'll find that form.
Yeah, my mother and father were both in the Navy.
Uh-huh.
And when mother died first, and we had the stone with her at the front, and then when dad died, they had the same stone, but put his information on the back with him going the other way.
Oh, so they were head to head.
This was in the Minneapolis, Fort Snelling.
Wow, did you hear that? So both parents were military, and one died first in the headstone, and then when the second one died, they put them back to back, so they're like this.
And they had one headstone for the two of them.
One headstone for the two of them, but they're buried head to head. Yes, ma'am.
They actually will say, like, where my husband is, there's an empty grave, but there's a marker, and the wife is already deceased, but they're saving that grave for the husband, so they'll be side by side.
Beautiful. Yeah, so,
Military is dynamite.
right. So if whatever spouse passes first, they bury, and they save the one next to it right, if they're both military, at a military military graveyard, which there's like 105 or so of them in the United States. If you've ever seen the cemeteries overseas, we were over at France and Italy, and they have whole cemeteries that are all Americans, or they're all Canadians, and you walk through there, and first off, the government takes care of them. They're absolutely gorgeous. And you see the German, it'll say German soldier, 17 years old, Canadian soldier, 17 years old, a very young gentlemen who died in World War I, World War II, that are buried there. And I think a lot, 60% I read of the military who died in World War II have been brought back to the United States. A lot of families requested to have them brought back, and I had an opportunity, I don't know if it was an opportunity, but it happened, when I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan for 3 years, taking one of my free trips to Korea to shop for the day. And on that airplane, though, were Vietnam vet bodies that they were transporting to Hawaii for identification and burial in the United States, because whenever they dig up in foreign countries and they come across human remains, the first thing they want to do is identify. And you know, the military now, everybody in the military has had a cheek swab, and there is never going to be an unknown soldier again. Never. And even one of the 3 that are in Washington was pulled and identified, I think from the Korean War. So that's a good thing. DNA does do some good. Excuse me just a second, I had another question.
And my great-grandfather was in the Civil War Union, and he's in an abandoned so-called cemetery. But it is under the auspices of another cemetery nearby. His gravestone now is not readable. And so I had not thought about contacting the government to get a plaque that would go on that headstone that's, you know, still there. And so I'm glad that I heard this talk.
Yeah, and Donna's the one who's done it, so she would know the paperwork or could show you. I'm a visual learner. You have to show it to me for me to understand it, so very good. She was saying that she has a civil war, then you can't read it anymore, so she's going to pursue the government replacing or adding on to the headstone that she knows is there.
I'd like to ask if there's anyone here that has a family member or a friend that is buried in Arlington.
Anybody here have relatives in Arlington? This lady right here. This lady in the back, all the way in the back. Jackie.
Okay, why I ask is because I have a classmate, high school classmate that's buried in Arlington. And it took a year from the time of his death to when he was actually buried. And so that's a same thing, okay. I wanted to check that out.
She was saying that to get buried in Arlington, it takes a very long time. Is it because of the paperwork, or was it?
I just heard that
Yeah.
it was a year.
Yeah. Well, now it's so closed or so full, not closed. Arlington, I could not be buried in Arlington, although I have a 214 and did fairly well in the military. You have to have exceptional, either you were a commander or a Medal of Honor winner or something like that. Yeah, categories.
War also.
Yeah, wars.
My brother was buried, and my sister-in-law, who died in 2012,
Uh-huh.
was also buried, but they're in the wall, so it's cremation.
Oh, cremation, ashes, yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am, one more.
Wanted to say with Arlington, one of the reasons is because there are some burials that it takes that long for them to get buried.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, the list. If you could get a plot in there, then the list to get you in there. Yeah. So you have a win-win if you just get to go. You know you're going in there because it is gorgeous. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, people.
Thank you so much. This would be the time I'm going to ask a motion to adjourn the meeting. And for those, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Bob Gallagher motions to adjourn the meeting. And what's your name, Beth? Jim Rasmussen seconds it. So the meeting is adjourned. For those of you that are going to make your exit now, we're going to have our raffle. So we're going to try to give you about